Picture this scene from December 1975. Inside a sterile laboratory at Kodak's headquarters in Rochester, New York, a young electrical engineer named Steve Sasson holds up a contraption that looks like a toaster crossed with a television set. Weighing 8 pounds and requiring 16 nickel-cadmium batteries, this ungainly machine has just captured the world's first digital photograph. The image is grainy, black and white, and takes 23 seconds to record onto a digital cassette tape. When Sasson demonstrates his invention to Kodak's executives, showing them how the camera displays the photograph on a television screen, the room falls silent. One executive finally speaks up with words that will echo through business history as one of the most catastrophic misjudgments ever made. "That's cute," he says, "but don't tell anyone about it." This moment represents the beginning of the end for what was once America's most beloved technology company. The device in Sasson's hands would eventually destroy entire industries, revolutionize how humans capture and share memories, and create trillion-dollar markets. But Kodak, the company that invented digital photography, would spend the next 37 years systematically burying their own breakthrough. They would hide patents, discourage research, and actively sabotage the future they had created. By the time they finally embraced digital technology, it was far too late. In 2012, this 130-year-old giant that had survived 2 world wars and the Great Depression would file for bankruptcy, destroyed by the very innovation they had birthed in that Rochester laboratory decades earlier. To understand the magnitude of Kodak's fall, you need to grasp just how dominant they once were in American business and culture. Founded in 1888 by George Eastman, Kodak didn't just sell cameras and film, they sold the very concept of photography to the masses. Their slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest," democratized an art form that had previously required professional expertise and expensive equipment. By 1976, just 1 year after Sasson's digital breakthrough, Kodak controlled a staggering 90% of film sales in the United States and 85% of camera sales. Their yellow film boxes became as recognizable as Coca-Cola bottles. The company's Rochester headquarters employed over 60,000 people, making it one of the largest private employers in New York State. Kodak's financial performance was equally impressive throughout the 1980s and 1990s. In 1981, their revenue reached $10 billion. By 1996, they were generating over $15 billion annually with profit margins that made Wall Street analysts swoon. The company's stock price soared from $12 per share in 1982 to $94 in 1997. Kodak wasn't just successful, they were synonymous with capturing life's most precious moments. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon in 1969, he used a Hasselblad camera loaded with Kodak film. When families gathered for holidays, weddings, and graduations, Kodak film preserved those memories. The company's research and development budget exceeded $1 billion annually, funding 13 major laboratories worldwide. They held over 11,000 patents and employed some of the world's most brilliant scientists and engineers. Kodak seemed invincible, an American success story that generated enormous wealth while helping families document their lives. But beneath this glittering success lay a corporate culture that would prove fatal when faced with disruptive change. After Steve Sasson's 1975 digital camera demonstration, Kodak's leadership made a calculated decision that seemed rational at the time, but would ultimately destroy them. The executives reasoned that digital photography threatened their most profitable business, the sale of film and photographic paper, where profit margins often exceeded 70%. Every roll of film sold generated ongoing revenue from developing and printing, creating what business analysts call a razor and blade model. Digital photography eliminated this recurring revenue stream entirely. So rather than cannibalize their existing business, Kodak chose to suppress digital innovation while continuing to milk their analog cash cow. They buried Sasson's patents, reassigned digital researchers to other projects, and publicly dismissed digital photography as a fad that would never match film quality. When Sony released the first commercial digital camera in 1981, Kodak's executives convinced themselves it was a novelty item for tech enthusiasts. As late as 1999, when digital cameras were rapidly improving and prices were falling, Kodak's chief executive officer told shareholders that digital photography wouldn't threaten traditional film for at least another decade. This wasn't ignorance, it was willful blindness driven by short-term profit considerations. Internal Kodak documents later revealed that their own market research accurately predicted digital photography's rise, but senior management chose to ignore data that contradicted their preferred narrative. They continued investing billions in new film manufacturing facilities even as digital camera sales began accelerating worldwide. The company that had revolutionized photography by making it accessible to everyone was now desperately trying to prevent the next photographic revolution. The consequences of this strategic blindness became catastrophic in the early 2000s as digital photography reached a tipping point that Kodak could no longer ignore or control. Digital camera sales exploded from 900,000 units worldwide in 1999 to 92 million units by 2008. Meanwhile, film sales collapsed at an even faster rate than Kodak's most pessimistic internal projections had predicted. The company's revenue plummeted from $15.9 billion in 2000 to $7.2 billion in 2010. Their workforce, which had peaked at 145,000 employees globally, was slashed repeatedly through devastating rounds of layoffs. By 2012, fewer than 19,000 people worked for Kodak worldwide. The human toll was particularly severe in Rochester, where the company had been the economic backbone for over a century. Entire neighborhoods that had housed Kodak engineers and factory workers fell into decline as unemployment soared and property values collapsed. Kodak's stock price, which had traded above $90 during the late 1990s, fell below $1 by late 2011. Desperate attempts to pivot into digital markets failed spectacularly because Kodak no longer possessed the technological expertise or market credibility they had once commanded. Competitors like Canon, Nikon, and Sony had spent decades perfecting digital photography, while Kodak sat on the sidelines protecting their dying film business. When Kodak finally tried to compete seriously in digital cameras around 2005, they were at least 5 years behind in technology and faced established competitors with superior products and stronger retail relationships. On January 19, 2012, this once mighty corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, marking the end of an era and one of the most dramatic corporate collapses in American business history. The Kodak catastrophe offers profound lessons about innovation, disruption, and the dangers of prioritizing short-term profits over long-term survival in rapidly changing markets. This wasn't a story of a company that failed to innovate, but rather a company that innovated brilliantly and then chose to suppress their own breakthrough because it threatened existing revenue streams. Kodak's leadership fell victim to what business theorists now call the innovator's dilemma, where successful companies become so invested in current business models that they cannot adapt to disruptive technologies, even ones they create themselves. Their bankruptcy filing sent shockwaves through corporate boardrooms worldwide, serving as a cautionary tale about the speed at which entire industries can be transformed in the digital age. The irony is breathtaking when you consider that Kodak's original mission was democratizing photography, yet they spent their final decades trying to prevent photography's next democratic revolution. Today, billions of people carry digital cameras more sophisticated than anything Kodak ever produced, built into smartphones that can instantly share images with anyone on Earth. The digital photography market that Kodak invented and then abandoned is now worth over $100 billion annually. Companies like Apple, Google, and Facebook have built massive portions of their empires on the foundation that Steve Sasson laid in that Rochester laboratory back in 1975. Kodak's legacy serves as a stark reminder that in business, especially technology business, the greatest threat often comes not from external competitors, but from internal resistance to change. Innovation without the courage to disrupt yourself is ultimately worthless, a lesson written in the ruins of what was once one of America's greatest companies.